I proposed this concept of using wasted renewable energy, monetizing it with Bitcoin mining, and nobody understood.
Some miners get up to 50% of their revenue from not mining, from just providing utility services.
There's a point where the interest between EDF and Bitcoin miners will match at a certain price.
Bitcoin miners, they obviously have more flexibility to stop and go as you please, but what flexibility are we talking about?
You could shut down in milliseconds. Pull the plug and the miners will shut down.
Another advantage of Bitcoin mining is that it's here, it's working. We don't need 10 years of R&D to actually prove that it's working.
It has been proven you can synthesize diamonds from CO2 in the atmosphere.
You get a physical diamond from digital gold. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Hi everyone, thanks for being with us. I'm Alexandre Stachtchenko. I'm president of Bitcoin National Institute in France, and today I have the pleasure to have and host Kenji Tateiwa, who is the founder and CEO of Agile Energy X, subsidiary of TEPCO in Japan. He has worked quite a bit on Bitcoin mining and nuclear energy, and we'll have the pleasure to talk with him about his professional experience and his take on Bitcoin mining and its usefulness for energy grids, let's say. Hi, Kenji.
Hi, Alexandre. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous?
Bonjour, je vais bien. Konnichiwa. So let's start right away. You have spent your career in the energy sector. Could you briefly walk us through the key stages of your professional journey, especially at TEPCO, the Japanese energy company, and your work in nuclear engineering, so that listeners understand your expertise?
Yes. So I did my bachelor's and master's in nuclear engineering in Japan at Kyoto University, and I joined Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, in 1996. I initially worked at the Fukushima Dai-2 nuclear power station, which is the sister plant of Fukushima Dai-1 nuclear power station. And in my early career, when I was transferred to the headquarters of TEPCO in the nuclear engineering department, I was spearheading the safety design of the next generation nuclear reactors, collaborating with companies such as General Electric, Toshiba, and Hitachi. And then when I was working on the next generation nuclear reactors, in the early 2000s, Enron came into the Japanese power market, and I decided that I needed to learn business as well, not only nuclear engineering. So I pursued an MBA, luckily got into Stanford University and got my MBA in 2004. I returned to TEPCO in 2004, and I made an internal career switch within TEPCO from the nuclear division to the international division, and I started to work on an Australian coal power project. But my interest was not necessarily in coal power plants. My big, hairy, audacious goal was to someday start TEPCO's international nuclear business. But I wanted to learn project financing in a more traditional coal power project initially. But then in 2006, another US energy company called Agile Energy, which is still around, NRG came up with this plan to build 2 nuclear reactors in Texas at their existing South Texas nuclear power station. And they asked TEPCO to help them because TEPCO co-developed the advanced boiling water reactors with GE, Toshiba, Hitachi, and built the world's first advanced boiling water reactors in Japan at TEPCO's nuclear power station. And NRG had a plan to build advanced boiling water reactors in Texas. So they asked TEPCO to help them build the 2 ABWRs in Texas. So I spearheaded TEPCO's international nuclear project, and actually TEPCO signed a deal with NRG to become the first Japanese utility to become equity investor in an international nuclear project in 2010. And I was getting ready to relocate to the US to work on this nuclear new build project in Texas. But unfortunately, the March 11th, 2011, the earthquake happened and the tsunami followed by the Fukushima nuclear accident. And I was in the thick of it and collaborating with international organizations, including the French nuclear industry, who helped TEPCO go through the severe accident in 2011. And then I was stationed in the Washington, D.C. office of TEPCO from September 2011, and the following 4 years, I was disseminating the lessons learned from the nuclear accident based in the U.S. After returning to Tokyo in 2015, I've been working on various other projects, including decommissioning of Fukushima Daiichi, and also working with Hitachi for the United Kingdom nuclear new build project called the Horizon Project, which unfortunately got terminated after several years. But then after working on the Horizon Project, I came up with this idea in 2018 using Bitcoin mining to monetize stranded or wasted renewable energy, which culminated in my founding Agile Energy X as an in-house startup within TEPCO.
Right. So you made a move from nuclear to renewables quite recently, let's say.
Yes, that's correct.
Just before we start the rest of the conversation, we recently had in Europe on the 20th of April there was a historic outage, blackout in Spain and Portugal. So at the time of recording, we don't have all the details about the cause of the blackout, but some experts have already identified a suspect, at least. I quote Javier Blas, who is a journalist at Bloomberg, specialized in energy, and he talks about the first blackout of the green electricity era. What's your take on it, and if you have one? And do you think it's an alarm bell for the general public about something that's an underestimated issue in the energy transition, which is the balancing of the grids?
Yes. So although I don't know much about the factual account of what happened in Spain and Portugal, the fact is Spain has become highly reliant on variable renewable energy, and Japan has this government mandate to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So we are kind of following Spain's path in increasing the amount of variable renewable energy. And this could be an alarm bell in the sense that the grid inertia will go down when we increase the amount of variable renewable energy, or the asynchronous generators. So I think the Japanese power utilities should study this case thoroughly so that similar events will not happen in Japan.
When you talk about inertia of the grid, can you please be more specific for the audience about what you mean by inertia, what it is, and how problematic it can be in case of, for example, a load that is missing on the network, or load that is added on the network? What's inertia?
Yeah, so inertia in the context of the grids, the grid used to rely on thermal power, nuclear power, hydropower, which generate power using heavy mass like turbines and generators. So it's rotating and it's synchronized with the grid, like in 50 hertz or 60 hertz, depending on what part of the world you're living in. But so when there's disturbance on the grid frequency, because of the heavy mass that's rotating, there's an inertia to maintain the frequency of the grid, even if there's like some amount of generation stops or the demand fluctuates. Because of the inertia, the 50 hertz or 60 hertz will not suddenly go down to like zero, or will not fluctuate that much. However, with solar and wind, which are not synchronized with the grid, there's no inertia or little inertia. So if there's a turbulence or fluctuation in the frequency of the grid, compared to the grid where you have a lot of heavy rotating generators, if you have more solar especially, the grid becomes more, will have less inertia, meaning it'll be more susceptible to the turbulence of the grid frequency.
So less inertia means that you're more likely to have, well, kind of like what happened in Spain, which is that you have a default in production, for example, and the grid cannot adjust to maintain its frequency, and so you have security measures that are going to disconnect all the capacity to prevent the network from being degraded. Is that?
That's correct. So if you have a smaller inertia in the grid, you have less time to respond if there's fluctuation in the frequency. If you have inertia, you have more time to respond.
Right. In the case of Spain and Portugal, I think for example, for now, the first indications we have from the electricity grid operator is that everything happened in like less than 5 seconds, which is quite rapid, to say the least.
Yes.
So going back to Agile Energy X, so you founded it in 2022, right?
That's correct.
You said that you tried to push the topic since 2018. What first led you back in 2018 to propose using excess power for Bitcoin mining, and what took you 4 years? Like, did you have to convince many people? What was the reception of your idea?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So back in 2018, I was working in the nuclear division of TEPCO, or more specifically, I was seconded to a company called Japan Atomic Power Company, which JAPC was collaborating with Hitachi for the United Kingdom nuclear new build project. So I was doing nuclear business development back in 2018, but I was still with TEPCO, so I was seconded to another company, JPC, at the time. And in 2018, TEPCO had an in-house training program to ask next generation TEPCO executives to come up with brilliant ideas to save TEPCO from the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear accident. TEPCO has the obligation to clean up the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant compensation. So it's hundreds of billions of dollars or more. And TEPCO has to come up with very large amount of extra revenue to serve the Fukushima local community. And so therefore, this training program mandated the next generation TEPCO executives to come up with this creative idea. So I volunteered to be part of this training program, and I was thinking what to propose. And in 2018, two independent things were happening. One was curtailment of solar power started in TEPCO, in Japan in 2018. It started in the southern part of Japan in the Kyushu area where it has abundant solar power. So many PV generators were installed, but because of the supply-demand gap during the spring and fall time, in the daytime when it's sunny and a lot of solar generation happening, but not much air conditioning demand or others, so solar power had to be curtailed. So that started in 2018. So people were thinking, why do we needed more renewable in Japan, but at the same time, there's wasted renewable energy that's starting. So that's one issue, and nobody was able
Just to interrupt you on this and to be clear, so the chronology of the events is that I don't know the picture of the electricity mix in Japan in 2011, right before the Fukushima accident. But what I understand is that after the accident, there was of course kind of a drop of the future nuclear projects and the reduction of the nuclear power in the mix, and so at that point in time, probably Japan decided to increase the size of the renewables in the grid, and that took basically several years. And in 2018, what's the new photograph of the grid in terms of what's the differential? Let's say, like in 2011, is it I don't know 5% of renewable, and it's 2018? What's the picture?
Yeah. So great point. Back in 2011, before the Fukushima nuclear accident, nuclear provided about 25% of the total power production in Japan. Renewable, excluding hydro, only provided, I think, less than 5%, maybe 2 or 3%. Hydro provided, I think, 7 or 8%. And then the balance was thermal power. Liquefied natural gas, coal, and a little bit of oil. And after the Fukushima nuclear accident, almost all nuclear power plants were shut down. So going from about 25% to 0% for nuclear, and it was filled by thermal power, fossil fuel fired thermal power, which the government didn't think it was okay. So Japan started to subsidize a lot of renewable energy. So now, currently in Japan, about 15% solar and wind, 5 or maybe 7% hydro. Nuclear a little bit has come back online, but only I think 6 or 7%, and the balance is solar power. So I mean thermal power. So
the curtailment issue that you have already start when you reach a figure as low as, I don't know, 10%, something like that?
I think, 10 or 15% at around 2018. But that's on average throughout the year. But during spring and fall and during the daytime, the percentage of solar power is higher than the average 10 or 15%.
Yes, of course. Okay. So that's
okay.
in
So that's one. So curtailment of renewable power started in 2018. Independently, 2018 was the year when the Bitcoin bubble burst. 2017 saw the peak, and then it burst. So in the media, people are saying Bitcoin was a fad or even a scam, and then Bitcoin mining was a waste of electricity. I wasn't really interested in cryptocurrency in general. I had heard of Bitcoin, but was not interested. I did not know what Bitcoin mining was. The first time I heard about Bitcoin mining was in the context of it's a wasteful machine, consume electricity for no value. But then
not
I
a very good first impression.
No, terrible first impression. So I thought it was a terrible industry, Bitcoin mining. But then I thought about, well, it could be a wasteful use of electricity, but it will depend on what electricity you're using. So on the one hand, in Japan, we are wasting renewable energy. There's no way to monetize the solar power during the daytime when there's no demand. And on the other hand, there is this machine, Bitcoin mining, which people say it's wasteful, but it does consume a lot of electricity, and it happens to be a very flexible demand. You can turn it on and off at your will. You can bring it anywhere. So time agnostic, location agnostic. So why not combine the two together? So I proposed this concept of using wasted renewable energy, monetizing it with Bitcoin mining in 2018 in the TEPCO in-house training program, and nobody understood. And I was kind of kindly advised not to propose this crazy idea, because part of the reasons for this training program is to get promoted in the future. So if I propose something crazy idea, I may be demoted. Well, not demoted, but I may not be promoted because I'm too crazy to become a future TEPCO executive.
Right. So you came back in 2022 with the idea.
That's right. Yeah. No. So I continued to push with this idea. So 2018, nobody understood. However, some executives of TEPCO thought it was interesting. They didn't know what Bitcoin mining was, but this crazy TEPCO employee, nuclear engineer Kenji, is proposing this. So he may be right. So let's hear about it. So I had the opportunity to brief the highest ranking TEPCO executives about this concept after the training program ended. So in early 2019, I made a personal trip to Singapore to talk with crypto experts, put together a business plan while I was doing my day-to-day nuclear job, and then proposed this idea. And the TEPCO executives gradually got interested. But still, it took me 2 years for me to be transferred to TEPCO Paragrid to work on this concept. So 2018, the following 2 years, I was still doing nuclear engineering work as a day-to-day job. And then from 2020, I was working in TEPCO Paragrid and started to do proof of concept within TEPCO for this Bitcoin mining with renewable concept. And then within TEPCO Paragrid, it took me 2 years to get the green light to found Agile Energy X.
So the problem that you're trying to solve is managing, let's say, the the extra capacity that you have in terms of solar, especially in times where, well, you have too much solar and you don't have any demand. So that's usually in the middle of the day, I guess. But Japan also is a very particular situation that we don't really have, for example, in France. France is deeply interconnected with the rest of Europe, and we rely heavily on nuclear. It's around 75% of the production of electricity in France, whereas Japan is an island grid with limited interconnections and, as you said, larger thermal power share in the mix, especially after, of course, Fukushima. How do these structural differences affect each country's ability to manage demand peaks and energy surpluses?
Yeah, good point. So in the case of Japan, we have to be self-sufficient, and at the same time, if we want to decarbonize, we have to overbuild renewable power. So during daytime, even though we know that there will be surplus renewable, we have to build more renewable to meet the nighttime demand or the fluctuating demand by more renewable. And therefore, the more need for managing the curtailed renewable power. So that's one. The other point, which I didn't mention, the reason why I got the green light from TEPCO to found Agile Energy X is the grid congestion issue. TEPCO Power Grid, which is the transmission and distribution arm of TEPCO, is a regulated utility responsible for transmitting and distributing electricity. And grid congestion is another issue on top of the curtailment. Congestion is an issue where you have supply of, say, renewable power, and you do have demand, but the grid is congested, so you cannot send all of the supply to where the demand is. So TEPCO Power Grid has the obligation to upgrade the grid in order to resolve the congestion, which costs a lot, takes a lot of time. Bitcoin
Congestion,
mining, yes.
Just to make an analogy for the audience, is like a highway where you have 3 or 4 or 5 lanes, and if all the lanes are full, then you can add more cars. It won't go faster. So I guess you were talking before about the solar that you have, especially in the south, on the island of Kyushu. I guess that demand is in Tokyo and in Osaka, and they're not in Kyushu.
That's correct.
What you're talking about is that you have a lot of production, and even though you have a lot of production and there is demand, sometimes just the highway is not large enough to handle all the production that you want to transfer from the south to the consumption centers. So that's what you mean by
that's correct. And the congestion happens on the national level as well as local level. So especially in the local level, in the greater Tokyo area, Tokyo has a lot of demand, but the outskirts of Tokyo, where there's opportunities for solar generation, the distribution system is congested within the greater Tokyo area. And TEPCO Power Grid has to expand the highway lanes or to expand the grid, but it's an inefficient way of capital expenditure because congestion only happens during a certain time of the year, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 hours out of the 8,760 hours a year. So it's kind of wasteful investment, which costs a lot, takes a lot of time, and the cost will have to be passed on to the ratepayers eventually. So rather than just simply expanding the grid, why not use the excess power that's causing the congestion near the source of generation using Bitcoin mining? So Bitcoin miners could be dispatched to the outskirts of Tokyo where there's lots of solar power, which is causing grid congestion. This resonated with the TEPCO executives because, especially TEPCO Power Grid executives, because one of the biggest issues that they're facing, TEPCO Power Grid is facing, is grid congestion. And Bitcoin mining, although it will not solve everything, it could be one solution that they did not have before to solve some of the congestion issues.
Right. So you would implement a small scale facility everywhere where there's a congestion due to excess production. But then the question that often comes when we talk about doing surplus power Bitcoin mining is it really profitable? Like, under what conditions does it become profitable? Under what conditions of volumes, price? Do you have I don't know, secondhand ASICs, so hardware? Do you need regulatory support? What matters for the operation to become profitable? Because that's something that many people have questions about. Like, if you have a hardware with capital expenditures and then it's only running for 30 hours a year, then how can it be ever profitable?
Yes, great question. So that's what we're trying to solve. And the path that Agile Energy X we have is, although it will take some time, maybe a few years, eventually Agile Energy X, we're envisioning having two pillars of businesses. The first pillar is mine Bitcoin using wasted renewable power. Right now, the uptime will be very short because the curtailment is happening and increasing, but not enough to make Bitcoin mining profitable. But in the future, if Japan wants to really achieve carbon neutrality, there will have to be a lot of offshore wind in rural parts of Japan, causing massive curtailment. So the first pillar is using those wasted renewable energy at relatively high uptime. The second strategy is to solve the grid congestion issue. And as you mentioned, Alexander, it will be very low uptime. However, the revenue that we will be relying on will not be from Bitcoin when we're running just a few percentage of time out of the year, but rather profit sharing with utilities that we miners will be able to reduce the cost of upgrading the grid in an inefficient way. So that's doable because utilities, not only TEPCO Power Grid, but other transmission and distribution companies all around across Japan, they are struggling with grid congestion issues, spending a lot of money. And if miners could lower the cost to a certain amount, utilities would be able to share some of the cost reduction with the miners. And there's a fairly large dollar amount or yen amount that could be shared. However, currently the regulatory system is such that it will be very difficult for the utilities to justify not upgrading the grid, because in lieu of upgrading the grid using Bitcoin miners like us, because regulators are not familiar with this concept. So even in the end, the regulators, I'm pretty sure they will understand that it'll be good. The social benefit will be greater using some Bitcoin mining to solve the grid congestion. But still, regulators don't fully understand. So regulators will probably not allow utilities to not upgrade and rather rely on Bitcoin mining at this moment. However, after Agile Energy X, we've been set up in 2022, I have been talking with regulators, government officials, university professors who are advisors to the government, and we're getting a lot of traction. They are finding this novel use of Bitcoin mining to solve grid congestion, which will not only stabilize the grid, it will eventually lower the ratepayers' cost for distributing electricity.
So the business model is to actually lower the cost of the of Paragrid and get a profit sharing on what you manage to make them save on their costs, right?
That's correct.
So it's a bit like what happens in Texas, where some miners get up to 50% of their revenue from not mining, from just providing utility services. Is it something that you envision in the future, where most miners are going to become utilities, and most utilities are going to use Bitcoin mining in kind of a merging of two industries where you can't really be profitable doing Bitcoin mining if you don't have any other lines of business where you provide services to electricity grids.
I think that's one likely future scenario, integration with Bitcoin mining with utilities. And I think we are kind of a rare case where Agile Energy X, we started from the utility and going into Bitcoin mining, but very small Bitcoin mining scale at this moment because we still don't have the business case fully established due to the regulatory status that I mentioned.
Do you can you can you give the amount of power that Bitcoin mining in Agile and Energy X represent as of now?
Yes, we're just doing proof of concept. So 100 kilowatt, two locations. One is proving that Bitcoin miners can be used to consume all of the variable solar power. So we have on-site behind the meter Bitcoin miner with a small solar power generation site. That's one. The other is another 50 kilowatt containerized Bitcoin miners is connected directly to the distribution line to demonstrate technically we can solve the grid congestion issue. And in the past 2 years, we've been doing two proof of concepts, and we have been able to demonstrate that the Bitcoin miners could be used to, one, monetize wasted renewable energy, and two, potentially solve the congestion issues.
Right. So, and do you have any knowledge or plans for when it's going to be considered a proof of concept and when you can expand?
Yeah. So I think we have proven already. So it's up to the regulators to allow utilities to utilize Bitcoin mining. But at the same time, we do have still not to be made public yet, but under the radar pipeline where we will be able to monetize stranded renewable energy in the order of several megawatts or up to 10 megawatts or more. Hopefully, we'll be able to make it public in the near future.
I hope so too. So going back to your, let's say, the core of your professional experience in the past decades, and make a comparison between two countries that have a particular history with nuclear, which are France and Japan. The main utility in France is EDF, so which basically produces nearly all the electricity and distributes it on the grid. They regularly modulate the reactors to match demand. From your perspective, is ramping up nuclear output up and down, is it something that's an unavoidable necessity, or is it a missed opportunity to monetize otherwise idle capacity? So just to give some figures, in France, the average production factor of the nuclear reactor is around 67 or 70%, which means that more than 30% of the time they're idling because they're either being maintained and their operations on the site, or because they just ramp down because they need to let the variable renewable energy go on the grid first.
Yeah, so I think it's missed opportunity. First, nuclear power anywhere in the world has to go through outage. In the case of Japan, every 13 months, and it takes 2 or 3 months for an outage. So the maximum capacity factor in Japan would only be like the mid 70% or whatever. In the case of France, the outage, that's unavoidable. But modulation, depending on the demand and renewable power, it is avoidable. You can use Bitcoin mining to fill up the gap of the demand so that nuclear power do not have to be ramped up or ramped down other than during the outage.
Right. So what's your, if you have any, what's your estimation of the gap, like in terms of percentage of the grid? Like, can we ramp up to something like 90%, which is the average in the world, or is it more close to a situation in Japan where it's like 75 and we have just that 5%?
I see. So it will. I'm not familiar with the regulatory requirement for how long outages have to take and in what duration. But I think Japan, it's the more stringent, most stringent. So in the case of France, if you can run for like 18 months or whatever, and you only have to do outage for 2 months, I think I can't do the calculation out of my hand in real time, but you could go more than 80% capacity factor. I think you're only 60 to 70% capacity factor. So other than if you don't modulate, I think you can go up to 80% right now.
Right, but so there's this economic argument for Bitcoin mining and modulation. Well, to prevent modulation, but there is also a very strong debate where I don't see a consensus actually, and that's the security debate around modulation. So in France we have the Nuclear Safety Authority that stressed in a recent report that modulation could potentially have a negative impact on reactor lifespans. But EDF, which is operating those reactors, it stresses out, on the contrary, that modulating has benefits, which is fuel saving, so uranium mostly, and the ability to shift maintenance outages into more convenient windows. And also, the former president of EDF, and in the past 20 years, it has been the case with all the presidents, they contradict the recent report of the safety authority by saying that there is no evidence that it can be a safety problem for reactors. So do you find those arguments convincing? Do you think redirecting part of that curtailed output into Bitcoin mining would create greater value? And who's right, basically, according to you, in this debate?
Yeah, so I don't want to take sides.
Of course.
However, yes, and also I am not fully versed in the French situation. However, so this is just my general comment. First of all, in terms of safety, technical safety of nuclear reactors, I think it's always better not to modulate, to run at stable power. I think it's the safest. If you change something, it could always cause some inadvertent issues. But the probability, it'll be very small because modulation in France, you've been doing it for many decades. So your EDF is very familiar. So the risk is, I think, minimal. But always, no modulation is always qualitatively better than doing modulation from a safety point of view. However, there could be benefits that EDF mentions, like fuel saving and optimizing the outage. But that optimization do not have to be dependent on the demand fluctuation or renewable fluctuation. Say for fuel saving, in Japan, we don't modulate nuclear. However, at the end of the fuel cycle, before nuclear power plants enters into an outage and being shut down, we sometimes do some that's called a coast down. So gradually decreasing the power in order to maximize the fuel efficiency, and then we shut down. So I think EDF is mentioning that coast down operation, which does happen for maximizing fuel efficiency. And also optimizing the timing of outage. It does make sense. You don't want to shut down nuclear when there's high demand for electricity. So you may want to modulate power so that you can shut down during spring or fall when there's not much demand. However, again, it could be scheduled. I mean, the unschedulable or the natural fluctuating demand and renewable demand, that the modulation caused by such demand and renewable fluctuation, nuclear power don't have to be modulated. And I don't think there's a reason that modulation is better when fluctuation of demand and renewable happens. So that's my understanding.
So just also for the audience, when we talk about modulating reactors, how does it happen? Like technically speaking, from a nuclear reactor point of view, how do you because you were mentioning turbines, for example, and the advantage that they have inertia, and now we're talking about the fact that we can actually lower the rate of those turbines. How does it happen? How do you modulate
Okay.
a reactor?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Great question. So actually, the rotation of the turbines and generators that will not change when modulating the reactor. Only the megawatt or the gigawatt that the nuclear reactor is sending to the grid changes. If the rotation changes, the frequency changes, so that should not change. But the power output would change. So from a reactor point of view, what's happening, and there's a slight difference in the nuclear reactor design that EDF has and TEPCO has. There are two different types. Pressurized water reactor, which EDF has, and 70% of the worldwide nuclear fleet is PWRs, pressurized water reactor. TEPCO has boiling water reactor. So it's slightly different. But in either case, when nuclear reactors, the power is modulated or throttled, either you insert control rod or change the concentration of the neutron absorbers. So in the case of PWR, pressurized water reactor that EDF has, you either insert the control rod or increase the concentration of boron that absorbs neutron. And neutron causes nuclear fission reaction, which generates heat and electricity. So when you modulate, you control the amount of neutron and the nuclear fission reaction that happens.
And so, so if the question is it profitable? Is it possible to actually transfer the charge of modulating from the industrial facility, which is the nuclear reactor, to the Bitcoin miner? How do we make the switch? Like, what's the ideal scenario in a few months, let's hope, or in a few years, where actually nuclear reactors in France function as a base load, 24 hours a day, let's say, best case scenario, and the modulation charge is put on the Bitcoin miner? How would you set up the business? Like, would it be installed on site with the nuclear reactors or not? Maybe you don't need it because probably you're going to have those grid congestions issues also. How would you set up the whole thing?
Yeah. So in the case of France, if there's no grid congestion happening, the Bitcoin miners do not necessarily have to be on site of the nuclear power station. However, the closer you are, the amount of transmission and distribution, the shorter, the less amount you'll lose through the loss of electricity, through the heat, electric
the Joule
effect. Yes. But it could be anywhere on the grid. The Bitcoin miners could be anywhere on the grid, and whether it makes economic sense for both EDF and the Bitcoin miner will depend on EDF comparing if they modulate, and so you modulate 1 megawatt for whatever hour. So whatever megawatt hour or gigawatt hour, it's lost revenue for EDF if they modulate. Because the demand is low at the time, if you modulate, you get zero revenue for the modulation. If Bitcoin miners can use that modulated electricity, from miners' point of view, they don't want to pay the full price, so it'll be lower than the average
price
tariff or price, but it's more than zero for EDF. So I think there's a point where the interest between EDF and Bitcoin miners will match at a certain price and at a certain amount of modulation or non-modulation for EDF.
Okay, and so in terms of operations, let's imagine that there's a container set up and the use case is going on. From a miner's perspective, does it mean that you have I don't know, asking basic questions, but is there like an API connected to EDF, and when they ask to modulate, then the Bitcoin miners go down, but just only 20% of the container? How does it go in terms of like very practical issues?
Yeah, so again, I'm not fully versed with the situation in France, but when currently when modulation happens for the nuclear power in France, you probably have low demand at the time. So
Hmm.
you're monitoring the demand, and there's too much supply of the combined nuclear and renewable, and you cannot shut down renewable, so you start to modulate nuclear. So that's what's happening when there's low demand. So it's not necessarily the generator that Bitcoin miners will have to monitor. It's rather the
The grid
transmission
operator.
system, yeah, grid operator looking at the supply and demand balance, and if too small demand, the grid operator could either ask EDF to modulate the reactor or ask the miner to ramp up to fill in the gap.
Right. Because so not necessarily talking about France and modulation, but I think this is a question that's frequently asked in terms of the ability to respond very fast from a miner's perspective. Because going back to Spain, for example, and Portugal, as I said, the whole thing went down to like 5 seconds. Is it a case where 5 seconds is enough to actually power up and down for a miner? Is it that kind of window in which miners are responsive? Because when we talk about, for example, demand response programs, where there is already other industrial facilities that actually are part of those programs around the world. So aluminum facilities, steel plants, and so on and so on. But usually when you tell a steel plant to shut down, they're going to say, okay, let me take 1 hour or 2 hours to actually shut down, and not entirely, and please less than X hours. Bitcoin miners, they obviously have more flexibility to stop and go as you please. But what flexibility are we talking about? Is it seconds? Is it milliseconds? Is it minutes? Because I guess that's important in case of grid stabilization.
Yes, absolutely. So in the case of Bitcoin miners, to shut down Bitcoin miners, it's very quick. Once you get the signal, for example, the grid operators tells the miners, we have shortage in power, shut it down. You could shut down in milliseconds, technically. You don't want to do it every day, shutting down in milliseconds. But technically, you can just pull the plug and the miners will shut down. Ideally, you want to gradually shut down in like a few minutes, but you could, in the case of emergency, if you just pull the plug, the miners will stop consuming any power in the megawatts or gigawatts order. So that's one. Ramping up, it's going to take a few minutes. If you plug in the Bitcoin miner, the fans will start to turn in a few seconds. ASIC will start to run in maybe 10 seconds or 20 seconds. But to fully ramp up, the Bitcoin miner has to connect to the grid, connect to the Bitcoin network, and either connect to the mining pool and get instructions and so forth. So to fully ramp up, it's going to take, say, like 5 minutes or more to ramp up. In the case of Spain, when you probably loss of supply happened first. I don't know, maybe loss of demand happened first. Either way, but if there's loss of supply happened and you had to load shed.
That's for the moment. That's the likely scenario.
Okay,
Is that there was an event where
yeah.
a bit of capacity
Mm.
generation went down.
Okay, so if that was the case, Bitcoin miners, as soon as they get the signal from the grid operator to shut down, it could be obviously automatic. You get the signal, shut down all of your miners on 100 megawatt miners immediately, and then technically you can shut it down in milliseconds, maybe 100 milliseconds or whatever, but technically less than a second. So it will be very helpful to have operating Bitcoin miners that could load shed in a very short time. In Japan, we don't have that.
So why do you don't? Did you have that in Japan?
We don't have Bitcoin miners running
Oh yeah, you mean
Yeah,
industrial scale? Yeah, okay, right.
industry scale. Yes,
Yeah,
our case is just a proof of
but
concept.
in a few years we have the same conversation, and probably it will be several gigawatts. I
That's
hope
right.
so.
In the
Um,
near future.
Well, it's a nice transition with another topic, which is Texas. You mentioned you also worked in the US and in Texas especially. In Texas, kind of the same story. Well, it's obviously it's a bit different, but there are comparisons to be made with what happened in Spain recently, which is that the story of Bitcoin in Texas started with a blackout in 2021, which was very historic blackout. There were several dozens of people who died from the blackout. It was the middle of winter, if I recall well. And the mandate that was given to the new interim CEO of the grid operator was to actually stabilize the grid. And in the course of this mandate, and because he was looking for ways to stabilize the grid, he found out that Bitcoin might be part of a solution. And why is it a good transition? Because we're in 2025, and from the figures that I can gather, it's around probably 3 to 5 gigawatts of Bitcoin mining that are already in place in Texas. So it can actually ramp up to several gigawatts in just a few years. It doesn't like it's ready for industrial scale, and the reason in most places it's not industrialized is for the reasons you mentioned, which are regulatory politics, but it's not really from an economic standpoint where it's actually viable. So this industrial scale, let's say, laboratory for flexible Bitcoin miners that absorb excess power and shut off instantly when the grid is tight. Do you think that there are any lessons from the Texan model, which is, of course, another disclaimer? It's a different situation. The grid is kind of isolated from the rest of the U.S. There's a lot of renewable. I think it's around 35% of the mix in Texas. So it's also very specific, but there are probably lessons from the Texan model that we can have for Japan, France, and Europe and the world. What are those lessons, according to you, and from both your experience in Bitcoin mining using surpluses and electricity grid, but also from the perspective of someone who's worked in Texas?
Yeah, so again, I'm not an expert on the Texas grid system, but my observation is the Texas ERCOT model is kind of a extreme market-based model for both good and bad. Extreme in the case that it's an energy-only market, meaning there's no capacity market. You only trade megawatt hours, which means the generators will have to rely on infrequent spike in the price so that they can recoup the capex to build out the generators. So it's kind of a high risk, high return kind of business. And I think Bitcoin miners being in the order of gigawatt can stabilize the grid in ERCOT because it's flexible. However, I have heard some or read articles or some kind of analysis on the pros and cons of having too much Bitcoin miners in the ERCOT system because although Bitcoin miners are technically capable of shutting down when there's not enough supply, ERCOT cannot necessarily control the Bitcoin miners. They will have to rely on either market mechanism or incentives, but no like direct control to automatically shut down. There could be unexpected behaviors of the market players that in case of grid instability, the economic incentive may not completely align with what regulators hope to happen in like similar situation that happened recently in Spain and Portugal. But in general, qualitatively, I think having Bitcoin miners as a flexible demand and the Bitcoin miners having the incentive to shut down when the price spikes or there's instability, that's good. But also there could be uncertainties or unknowns with this large amount of gigawatts of flexible demand.
Right. So the model has some lessons to be learned, but cannot be really parallelized with grids that are operating not only that are operating also with capacity markets. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And
Right.
also, I read some article, or maybe it was a podcast, but during the 2021 or whatever winter Texas outage, although Bitcoin miners did shut down and contribute to the stabilization of the grid, still some of the miners were criticized for running this wasteful Bitcoin mining machine during this crisis. Even though they contributed, because the general public do not necessarily understand the contribution of this flexible demand. So there could be reputation risk for utilities to use Bitcoin mining, even though there's positive benefit, because people may not understand and may think because of Bitcoin mining, this crisis happened. There could be that misunderstanding happening.
Well, that's a great point on which it's interesting to have your point of view. So especially in terms of nuclear, but not only, because it's mostly about renewables, for example, in Texas. But combining those sources of energy with Bitcoin mining can face, in terms of public communication, a double stigma. So nuclear safety concerns, of course, that's one. For renewables, there are other stigma, it's intermittent, it's a waste of, I don't know, rare earth, and so on and so on. And the criticism of Bitcoin's energy use. So how have you addressed such perception in Japan? And what do you think is a good communication strategies for Japan and for France, for two different publics, I would say, for executives and for the general audience?
Yeah, great question. So I'm carrying the two stigmas, both nuclear and Bitcoin mining, in Japan. I don't
Life is
have an
hard.
I don't have a panacea how to solve this. However, when I proposed founding Agile Energy X 3 years ago, there were oppositions within the TEPCO executives that there could be reputational risk for TEPCO setting up a company that uses Bitcoin mining. Surprisingly, after we were founded, I've heard almost no criticism for TEPCO setting up Agile Energy X, but more positive comments that TEPCO using this innovative concept of combining wasted renewable energy and this power guzzler Bitcoin mining together to solve the issue of grid congestion and more renewable energy and grid stabilization. And also, I think it helped that Agile Energy X, we're not just mining Bitcoin with wasted renewable energy. We came up with this concept called the ultimate circular economy, using waste heat from Bitcoin miners and using the waste heat to first heat the greenhouse that houses aquaponics, which is a circular agriculture combining fish and vegetable. Also using waste heat to heat the direct air capture system for carbon negativity to capture the CO2 in an adsorbent and then recover the CO2. You need a lot of energy to heat the adsorbent. And our concept is to use waste heat from Bitcoin mining to recover the carbon dioxide. And then the CO2 that we recover from the direct air capture system, we will use it in two ways. One is to use the CO2 to feed the vegetables in the aquaponics system to promote photosynthesis. The other is to use CO2 and dissolve it in molten salt and electrolyze the carbonate ion in molten salt using renewable energy. And then we'll be able to split carbonate ion into oxygen gas and carbon. And the carbon could either be graphite or if you do it very well, you get diamond crystallites. Very tiny diamonds, but still, it has been proven you can generate or synthesize tiny diamonds, from CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's wasted renewable energy and air and internet connection, you get Bitcoin, environmentally friendly vegetables, fish, and diamonds,
Everything.
and carbon negativity.
You get physical diamond from digital gold.
That's right. Yes.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. So you have a whole system of which makes it like hard to attack. Let's say, because if you
That's
attack
right.
it, you attack the whole thing, even the air capture and the aquaponic and so on, so on and so on. Because that's also something that comes frequently, which is that when we try to have the conversation about the use of surpluses in terms of renewable solar and wind, there are sometimes people who would say, well, surpluses don't exist. Okay, right. So that's kind of one kind of person. There are other people who say, yes, they do exist, but we have other solutions. We have, for example, green hydrogen. We have off-peak electric vehicle charging. We have, I don't know, other kind of solutions. And then there's the debate. The debate becomes kind of a moral debate. If we have other solutions, then we don't need to waste it on some digital fantasy. What unique advantages does Bitcoin mining offer compared to those alternatives? Not necessarily in all the cases, by the way, because it's not necessarily something that's we don't need to oppose solutions. Like oftentimes they're just complementary. But what are the unique advantages of Bitcoin mining? In which cases would you say, well, here in this case, there are other solutions, but they are less useful. Like really, they are less economic. There's less economic sense. There's less utility, etc., etc.
Yes, and before I answer that, the first point, Alexander, you mentioned whether there's wasted energy or not. I think there needs to be wasted energy. I mean, it's inevitable because, especially in the case of Japan, if we want to achieve carbon neutrality and we have to rely on variable renewable energy, we have to overbuild. And overbuild means in some cases there'll be too much supply, and which will lead to curtailment. So there will be wasted variable renewable energy. And then the next point is how we monetize the wasted renewable energy. What Bitcoin's one, green hydrogen or batteries or EV charging, those are different, or large hyperscaler data centers. So let's compare. And again, as I mentioned, I'm not criticizing other solutions. Everything has its pros and cons. Bitcoin mining is not perfect. However, Bitcoin mining, in the sense that it's the most flexible in terms of location agnostic and time agnostic, there's nothing, no other demand matches Bitcoin mining. For example, green hydrogen. I like hydrogen. It'll be great if there are fuel cell vehicles, hydrogen used for steel mills and so forth. But one of the issues is that say for example, I have been talking with a small town in Hokkaido, northern part of Japan, Toyotomi town, where they have natural gas together with hot spot. So the town is famous for hot spot. The gas, they're venting to the atmosphere because there's no use. They can't even flare for various regulatory reasons. So I called up the city hall and I told them, rather than venting the methane gas, why not generate power and we could mine Bitcoin. They are also thinking about using the wasted methane gas to convert methane gas into hydrogen and carbon nanotube, which is great. But what to do with hydrogen in the northern tip of Japan? You have to store hydrogen, you have to transport hydrogen, you have to sell hydrogen. All of this value chain is extremely challenging. Hopefully, someday in the near future, that will be solved, but right now, it's not solved. You have to freeze it very low temperature to liquefy hydrogen. You have to transport it. There's no hydrogen gas pipelines. You have to send it with like vehicles, and then you have to sell it. But there's not much fuel cell vehicles running around. So rather than generating hydrogen you can mine Bitcoin on site, and you get Bitcoin real time. So that's the positive compared to hydrogen. But hydrogen, it could be used as energy carrier. So Bitcoin mining, once you convert it into Bitcoin, you cannot use it as energy directly. So if you need energy carrier, then go with hydrogen. But if you just want to monetize, Bitcoin mining is better.
So you're saying another way of putting it is that it's more Bitcoin is more decentralized. Like it doesn't need a big source to be profitable. On the contrary, if you want to do hydrogen, you'd rather have a very big source so that it's actually so much profitable that you can build the distribution system.
That's right. You need the infrastructure to make the hydrogen economy work. And even if you built the hydrogen infrastructure, still where the wasted energy is far away, you have to transport hydrogen, which is kind of wasteful in transporting. You will need energy and time and money to transport hydrogen.
So you need a big source, and you also need to be close to the consumption center.
That's right. And you also have to have an off-taker of hydrogen. You have to sell hydrogen.
Yeah,
you have to do contractual work. All of that is not necessary for a Bitcoin.
So that's for hydrogen. There's also batteries and EVs especially.
Batteries and EVs. That's wonderful. You need EVs for transportation. You need batteries for resilience. Bitcoin you cannot ride on Bitcoin. You cannot discharge Bitcoin into electricity. So EVs and batteries have their uses. In the case of EVs, it's good that you could charge EVs when there's excess power, but EVs may not be at the charging station when you want to when you have surplus power. Someone may be driving EVs, or the EVs may be full when you want to charge the EVs. You can't really control what the owner of the EV, you have to control the behavior, manage the behavior of the EV owner and driver. So that's one issue or difficulty with EVs. Batteries, it's very important to have some batteries to balance the grid. However, there's a limited amount of megawatt hour that you could store on a battery. If it's full, you cannot charge it more, even if you have more surplus electricity. Bitcoin mining, there's no limit that you can run the Bitcoin miners. And also batteries, when it's full, you have to discharge it. And when the batteries discharge, when the grid is congested, it could exacerbate the grid congestion. Bitcoin mining, you only consume electricity. So you will not congest the grid by discharging electricity from Bitcoin miners.
Right. So that's one of the reasons I was saying it's mostly complementary. Like you can have all solutions being used at different levels and different situations, but in terms of flexibility, I think for the moment at least nothing beats Bitcoin. And another thing that I mentioned obviously is we were talking about Texas, is that most of the other solutions are just except for batteries, for example, they are solutions on paper for the moment. There are no examples of widespread use at industrial scale, like the deployment of 3 to 5 gigawatts in 4 years for an industry that basically has no support from anyone, no public authority, no nothing, shows that it's actually ready. Like this is another advantage of Bitcoin mining, is that it's here, it's working at an industrial scale. We don't need 10 years of R&D to actually prove that it's working. So that's also another advantages. So we've been together for quite a bit of time. I just have maybe 2 or 3 more questions before we wrap up the episode. One is kind of operational in terms of hardware. We know that mining rigs they age quickly from a purely economic standpoint. because in terms of a technical standpoint, you can, like I at home mine with the S9, so it's still working. But I mine for heat. I don't mine for profitability. So do you believe that integrating mining rigs as a grid service could extend their useful life and overall return on investment, which means that, for example, you could have energy utility companies when they're using Bitcoin mining for preventing curtailment or congestion. Do they actually need to have the latest hardware, or can they just be the first customer of secondhand ASICs?
Absolutely. So that's our business model. So first, we will use high-end machines to run at high uptime if there's a place where there's a lot of excess renewable energy, and then use the second-hand S9s or S19s or in the future S21s in grid congested areas, or eventually for generating just heat in cold places in Japan. So obviously that's a natural way of using the second-hand or third-hand low performance Bitcoin miners, as long as it works. If you can consume electricity and generate heat, that's good enough to solve the grid congestion issue.
Well, especially if you have that a fully integrated system where at the end you get diamonds and
That's
fishes.
right. That's right.
Another question is from a regulatory and political landscape, because you were talking about the hurdles. Like you've proven your proof of concept, but now regulators are still afraid to go on. What policy or regulatory changes would most accelerate surplus power Bitcoin mining projects? And in Japan, of course, because you know the market, but maybe you know for Europe, France, or the US. Do major barriers like grid codes, taxation, political acceptance, do those barriers still need to be removed? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, I think one is public perception. Utilities using or relying on Bitcoin mining, even partially to solve the grid congestion issue. The utilities want to see that the public will be okay using Bitcoin mining. And then if the public is okay, then the regulator would more likely be okay to set the grid code to allow utilities to use Bitcoin mining.
Right. So it's mostly a cultural war.
Yes. And also the market mechanism to have enough economic incentives for the Bitcoin miners to deploy Bitcoin mining machines near the congested area. If the fee is too low, it doesn't make economic sense, and then the industry will not flourish.
So you're talking about the let's say the break-even price that interests the producer of the energy and the Bitcoin miner needs to actually be high enough for the miner to be profitable.
That's correct. And that profit to the miners, I think there's enough potential for the profit sharing just by reducing the cost of utilities having to upgrade the grid and build a lot of substations and so forth.
Now, last question, maybe a very practical one, is into different times. So the first one is if you meet an EDF or executive or a politician in France and you have 30 seconds, like an elevator pitch, what would you say so to show that it's actually a very good solution for the EDF? And the second part of the question is down the road, what if supposedly if you manage to convince that person, what due diligence steps and risk management practices they should incumbent energy companies such as EDF follow before integrating Bitcoin mining into their strategy?
Yeah, okay. So the 30-second elevator pitch. I would encourage the EDF executives to come to Tokyo. There's this place called Tokyo Bitcoin Base, which recently opened. And we have at Agile Energy X, we have set this ultimate circular economy demonstration machine at the front of the Tokyo Bitcoin base building. So I'll explain to them how it works, how it will benefit not only the utilities, but also the local communities. Wasteful energy can be monetized and create jobs and boost the local economy. So everyone will be happy by integrating Bitcoin mining in the grid system. So that's the first point. Second point, due diligence. I'll probably start by reading the Bitcoin white paper, and everything is open source, and listen to many of the podcasts to understand yourself whether Bitcoin is just a fad or a Ponzi scheme. And if you dig deeply, you will understand that it's not, and it's open. So if you spend a lot of time, you'll eventually be able to understand and come to the conclusion it actually makes the most sense for utilities to understand Bitcoin mining and integrate it with the grid.
Well, thank you very much, Kenji Tateiwa, for being with us and providing us with those so many useful insights. And I hope the audience liked it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Au revoir.
Wow.